Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything there is in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And we are back for episode 41, and this is the Super Bowl 51 special. Yes. Wow, the season really came and went this year, Anthony.
It did go pretty fast,
It did. And I'm like, man, we have to... It's a bittersweet moment because we literally have to wait till August for football to come back again. But, of course, the show will not go anywhere. We're going to keep talking about fantasy football all year long.
The funny thing, like, someone brought this up, and it's basically just like, we watched this, for what, like 4 months, basically? And then after this happens, we go back to, like, Sundays, and we're just like, what do we do? I don't know what to do on Sunday. I'm just used to watching football. Like, it's the thing where it's just like we're so used to this for a certain amount of time, and then once it's gone, it's just like, oh, okay, now I have to do other things. And you scramble to do other stuff because you're just used to waking up, at least for us on the West Coast, waking up at about 9:30 or so and watching the game, in the East Coast more around 1 o'clock, but you're just used to, like, starting your day with football coverage, right? Like, that's kind of how this goes, and then once, March hits, it's just like, do I watch college football or college basketball now? Is that what I do to March Madness? Okay, I guess I'll just kind of go over here. But, yeah, like you said, we're going to be still talking about fantasy football after the season. But for right now, we're going to talk about specifically the two teams that are in the Super Bowl right now, the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons. For the Patriots, at least through for, as far as the Patriots goes, fantasy football purposes, Tom Brady started off the year on the bench, but still managed to have basically a top 15.
Well, he was on the bench. He was suspended.
Well, so. Fine. My point is, like, he wasn't playing.
Okay.
And if you go to NFL.com, fantasy football-wise, he was still like the 15th ranked quarterback in the NFL. And that's in front of people, that have actually played all of the games. That's in front of people like Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, Roethlisberger got hurt, Flacco, Eli Manning, Alex Smith. He's in front of all those guys. Like, Brady basically had to take 4 games off, for whether you think they're good reasons or bad reasons. He had to have that time off, and he was basically like percentage, like not even a full point, like, fractions of a point away from being ahead of Phillip Rivers and Marcus Mariota. Like, they were all kind of jumbled together in that thing. And like I said, Brady just kind of came out of the gate, first few games of the season, 406 yards, 376 yards, 315 yards in week 8. Like, he just basically had this vendetta the entire year against Roger Goodell. And it was for fantasy football purposes. You maybe didn't know that Brady could still do the things he's doing because he's 39 years old. But he came into the season so determined, so mad, basically wanting to prove that, like, I understand I got suspended. I can't do anything about it now. I took it to as big a court as I could possibly have brought it to outside of the U.S. Supreme Court. I want to prove that this is stupid, and I'm still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And, I mean, honestly, outside of, 1 or 2 games, he basically was throwing for about 275 yards every single week. He was basically in the zone the entire year. And, I mean, forget about Brady, because, yeah, Brady was kind of a beast this entire season. Forget about the fact that LeGarrette Blount had 18 rushing touchdowns the entire year. Basically, he was the stopgap, while Brady was gone. They had, LeGarrette Blount in there just to make sure that they stayed afloat, because I mean, you didn't know if Jimmy Garoppolo was going to do well. You didn't know if they were going to be able to basically have the same kind of success, right? Because this whole thing is tied to Belichick and Brady, and if one of them goes, you don't know if they're going to be the same kind of team. But in those first, 4 weeks of the season, he had 4 rushing touchdowns, and it was one of the things where, the guy Blunt was doing his thing, even in the wide receiver category, right? Like, even if you go pretty much in the wide receiver category, they don't have that one kind of, I guess, standout guy like they had with Randy Moss back in the day, back in 2007, or Wes Welker, I guess, too. But Julian Edelman was basically that guy. And, you just kind of look at how this whole season's gone. Like, they never really had somebody who was the quote-unquote, top guy in the league. Like, Julian Edelman had a lot of, good stats and everything else like that. But, I mean, he only had 3 touchdowns, but he kept getting you just receptions. That was the thing that Julian Edelman would get more than anything else. It was always those receiving yards, just kind of like, especially if you're in a PPR league, just over and over and over and over again, always just kind of grinding away at it, always kind of being something to where, he's not going to be someone like a Julio Jones, who we'll get to in a little bit. He's not going to be someone like a Mike Evans, who kind of had a kind of surprise kind of season, right? Kind of a resurgent kind of a season. He's not Odell Beckham. He's not, Antonio Brown. He's not someone like that, but still 98 receptions. He's someone that, like, every single week would do stuff for you. And then you bring up people, Chris Hogan being the guy that played lacrosse, and towards the end of the year, he was one that got points for you. Like, they always found people to kind of fill in the gaps the entire season. I mean, they shut out the Texans 27-0 with Jacoby Brissett. Like, how did that happen? Like, I have no idea how that happened to this day. Like, I understand the Texans were bad, but they were bad offensively. Defensively, they still had, all these things that was doing good. And you see right now on the TV screen, the Bears are expected to make a trade offer for Jimmy Garoppolo, which totally makes sense because the Bears, Jay Cutler, he's been trashed his entire career, basically. But for the last, 2 or 3 years, he hasn't been the same as he used to be over in Denver. And, the Patriots are probably, now that I see this, like, what are the Bears, like the 12th overall pick or something like that? Like,
this year the Bears, I think they have the 3rd.
Is it the 3rd?
The third or 4th.
I thought they were like...
They're in the top 5.
They're in the top 5?
Yeah,
okay.
They're in the top 5.
Okay, so then, if you're... Oh, yeah, they're 3rd. Why did I think they were like 12th or 13th? Anyways, yeah, they're the 3rd pick in the draft. So if you're the Bears, do you basically just say, like, give us Jimmy because he's going to be as good? You've seen him basically be good, and he's going to be someone who, from a straight, since we're, we'll stick to the whole fantasy purposes of this whole show right now. If you just go straight from a fantasy football perspective, you got Jimmy Garoppolo, who, only played 3 games this year because he got hurt after one of them, but actually it was only 2 games. He goes for 264 and 232 yards and 3 touchdowns, 1 touchdown. So he's been somebody who wasn't great, but we thought the Cardinals were going to be a great team this year. They turned out to be crap. That's fine. But he had, 4 touchdowns, and he got injured in the first half of the Dolphin game where he was just killing them. I understand the Patriots are a great team, but you have talent over in Chicago. We talked about Howard and how good he was as a rookie, as a running back, to kind of take some pressure off of Jimmy Garoppolo like that. And you still got Alshon Jeffrey as a wide receiver. You got actual talent on that team, and if they can make a trade for him, that's probably because you were wondering where he was going to go, if he was going to go to the Browns or if he was going to go to, a team that's in need of a quarterback. That's really good if you're Garoppolo. That's a team that can actually make you look a little bit better.
Yeah, and when you look at the overall perspective of the Patriots from a fantasy perspective,
right?
Tom Brady had probably the best. I wouldn't say the best year. I wouldn't say the best stats of ever his career, but his 28-2 touchdown and interception ratio was the best ever, I think, in NFL history. Then you got LeGarrette Blount, who had a career high 18 touchdowns, even though he only averaged 3.9 yards a carry. Dion Lewis, if he would have been healthy throughout the entire year, I think he would have had an even bigger role. I think he would have had more touchdowns. I don't know if LeGarrette Blount wouldn't have as many touchdowns, but they did find ways for James White. The thing that stand out to me about the receiving core for the Patriots was Julian Edelman. He was like that as a top receiver throughout the year, but only had 3 touchdowns. And the leader in touchdowns was Martellus Bennett. So that kind of tells you how... that Tom Brady loves the tight end.
Oh, yeah.
So and just imagine if Gronk was healthy this year.
And that's, the other thing. I talked about, Hogan and all them. Gronk also.
Hogan was someone that played lacrosse for 4 years at Penn State. Then he played in the FCS. Then he got cut by 4 teams, and now he's in the Super Bowl. So dreams can happen, guys. And Julian Edelman, though, when I look at the targets, 158 for Julian Edelman, that leads the Patriots.
It's literally double.
And the next,
most of the people.
And then the next
is
on the
James
list,
White with 86.
Exactly. So
think it's almost double.
That is double. Like, that is insane. But we're gonna take our first break here, and we're actually going to discuss the Patriots' opponent for Super Bowl 51, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. And there is a lot to talk about.
Oh yeah,
about the Falcons from a fantasy perspective, and we will talk about Hot Atlanta when we come back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back to our Super Bowl 51 special of the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. We literally just got done talking about the New England Patriots. Now it's time to talk about the high-flying Atlanta Falcons offense. This is the number 1 offense of the year. We didn't talk much about the Patriots' number 1 defense. We didn't talk about them from an IDP standpoint.
Right.
But we're just focusing on the offense for the majority of the show. So the Falcons had pretty historic year. They had, I think, they scored 508 points. That's the 8th most ever in the history of the NFL. And if you think about the history of the NFL, there's some really great offenses that have occurred throughout the long history of the NFL. But I think the guy that I want to talk about, he's someone that had really outranked. He really outplayed his preseason ranking, and that is Matt Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
I think in my fantasy league, I don't even think he was drafted. I think he was he was a popular waiver wire pickup. I think in week 2. I think week 1. I think a lot of people didn't pick him up because they watched him from 2015 and the inconsistency that they saw from the Falcons offense.
Right. 2016,
a whole different story. I don't remember one bad game he's had. I don't think he's ever had a bad game this year. That's the top year he's had. He had literally nearly 5,000 yards, the best year he's ever had in his career, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And I do think it helps when you have a guy like Julio Jones as your number 1 guy. And it seems like the league is kind of transitioning towards, you have to have that number 1 receiver now because it's just a quarterback-driven league. And remember, Julio Jones had one of the best fantasy performances of the year with that 300-yard game.
Right.
And in that same game, Matt Ryan threw for 504 yards against the Carolina Panthers. So right. Those are the 2 probably the best fantasy performances, and they were on the same team in the same game. And don't forget about the running backs, too. The running backs had a heck of a season for fantasy owners out there.
Yeah, no, Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman, both of them basically were, I'll do one thing one week, you do something another one. Combining, they were over 1,500 yards, almost 1,600 yards, literally a yard away from 1,600 yards, and 19 touchdowns. They were somebody who, you always had to prepare for. Devontae Freeman more because he had 1,000 yards. But even you look at something like Tevin Coleman as far as receiving goes, he had 31 receptions for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did stuff in the passing game as well, and then you go look at the whole receiving core they have. Forget about Julio Jones, who's a freak of nature, one of the top probably 3 wide receivers in the NFL, depending on how you feel about Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown. But then you had Julio Jones, you had Mohamed Sanu, you had Taylor Gabriel, you had Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman, all these people that just down the list, all the guys that could pick, you apart no matter what you did. And like you saw, like I said, with Matt Ryan, basically 5,000 yards passing. He was someone that throughout the entire season, like, last year, people, like you said, you didn't know what to expect from him because 21 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. That's bad. I understand he basically threw for 4,600 yards. But if you're basically throwing as many interceptions as you are touchdowns, you're a bad quarterback, right? Like, that's kind of Eli Manning status. I'm not saying Eli's bad, but Eli will do those things. Yet he did those a lot before Odell Beckham was on the team. And you talked about something where if you have the number one wide receiver, it's something that you need, also because that can help spread it around, right? We kind of saw that over there. We saw that in New York because you had that. You also spread it out with Victor Cruz, and you had Sterling Shepard also coming in and doing stuff. Like, you had these things where you have the number one guy, but you spread it around. I mean, not so much this year with Antonio Brown, but the year before with Martavis Bryant, you kind of had a thing where you had the one person, but you have to double team him, and you can kind of spread it around, right? Mohamed Sanu was somebody that, you probably heard of him before because you probably had him on your fantasy team at some point in the year, back when he was on Cincinnati, someone that was always kind of a disappointing, kind of like he'll do good one week, he'll do bad the other. And, yeah, you could say that he did that as far as that goes this year because he never really had that, like, breakout game outside of, like an 84-yard game against the Packers. But he was always somebody that just would get you enough yards to kind of go throughout the week if you needed someone on a waiver wire pickup. And this whole team was just built on the thing of you needed to have some type of plan for them because they had literally like 6 or 7 different ways to pick you apart. Talked about the Patriots and what they had as far as Brady throwing it to all these guys like Edelman or throwing it to Gronk or throwing it to Hogan later on in the year. Same thing with the Falcons. Like, they basically, these two offenses that you have, they're kind of different because one is the offense of just like slow, short slant routes or screen routes, stuff like that with the Patriots, to where the Falcons, it was just like going for broke, just like Julio Jones, got it, throwing it deep. Mohamed Sanu, same sort of thing, just not to the same jaw-dropping level. And now you get to the point where you have the two probably best offenses in the league outside of, because I wouldn't say the Steelers just because they were injured so much, and I wouldn't say the Giants because they were inconsistent. Like, these were probably the two best offenses in the NFL, coming into the playoffs. And, we saw basically in both championship games, both their offenses on full display.
Yeah, and the thing that really spoke out to me about the Atlanta Falcons offense was when the running backs, they weren't rushing the ball. They were catching passes out of the backfield. Right. Devontae Freeman had 11 touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah.
And he had 3, I believe he had 3 through the air. So that's a total of 14, total of 13. And Tevin Coleman had 8 touchdowns, and then he had 3 through the air as well. So he had a total of 11. So these guys are like highly involved in this offense. And
yeah, basically, if you take into account everything, they basically had 1,600 yards of rushing yards, and you had more or less somewhere around the lines of basically 900 yards receiving. You basically had 2,500 yards of total offense just produced by these two guys throughout the whole year, and they had basically 85 receptions through the two of them. And like, they were, receiving or rushing, kind of Marshall Faulk status. Like, they were total packages, especially for fantasy football purposes.
Yeah, and that's crazy to have two running backs like that. And I actually got their numbers mixed up. Devontae Freeman actually had 2 receiving touchdowns, which brought his total to 13, and Tevin Coleman had 3, which brought his total to 11. So both of these guys have more
25.
Total, and that's crazy. Like you don't see it a lot nowadays. You usually are used to seeing like the number one back, the touches. No, both of these guys are the number one back in our offense. And I remember there's times when Tevin Coleman didn't play, and then Devontae Freeman totally took over carries. And there was times when I don't think Devontae Freeman actually was hurt this year. Honestly, I don't remember a time, but yeah, it's crazy that these guys had type of year. I don't know if they will have the same type of year because the Kyle Shanahan's not going to be the offensive coordinator there, so that's something we can talk about in a later episode. But I do think Mohamed Sanu was. I don't know if he was a breakout star in fantasy, but he's definitely on the radar for next year because, when Julio Jones wasn't playing well at games, Mohamed Sanu was the guy to ever take over. Mm-hmm. You got Taylor Gabriel too. We can't forget about him.
True. Yeah. That's the thing. This offense was just. It was kind of, they're doing all this stuff basically without a tight end. It was basically the running backs and wide receivers. It wasn't like the Patriots had Gronk and Martellus Bennett. This was all wide receivers and running backs for them. And you talk about someone, you get the whole kind of situation. Taylor Gabriel, who was cut from the Browns. Good job by you, Brown. Solid work by you cutting somebody that could actually have been somebody that was productive. But, he had just as good of a season as Mohamed Sanu, and coming out of nowhere, 6 touchdown passes. He had a great season as well. It was just the whole offense was just kind of insane.
Yeah, right. Well, we agree that the offense of the Atlanta Falcons was completely insane this year, and I do think that they have a chance to replicate the same success because Kyle Shanahan's not going to be the offensive coordinator. He's probably going to be the 49ers coach next year.
Maybe he just decides never mind and stays there.
That would be hilarious, honestly. That would be honestly hilarious. But if that does happen, I will talk about it on Monday on the football show. But we're going to take our last break here, and we're going to talk about some of our bad beats. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Some of the worst kind of...
Probably
I've got a bad one.
Probably our worst weeks ever in fantasy, and we will tell you what those are when we get back to the Goins to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Well, I think every fantasy owner out there has had a week where, really? Why? Like, did that happen to me? Really? And what I'm talking about is that, when you have that week, when you think you're going to win and when you pretty much have them back. Mm-hmm. But then again, Monday Night Football comes around.
Right.
And you realize that they have a player or two left and they win the game. And I'm like, really? Come on. And then you realize that you left a lot of points on the bench. That's happened to me a variety of times throughout my fantasy football playing career. But we're going to get into some bad beats, and we're going to try to keep it together here. Because we know we don't like talking about this stuff because we are expected to be experts at this, but we just want to know nobody's perfect in this world.
We've talked enough about, or at least I've talked enough about, Fedorowicz and how DeAndre Hopkins isn't the guy that I was hoping it would be this year. That's fine. And I've had some good luck. Like I picked up Tyreek Hill when he was a free agent, and he basically led me all the way to the championship of my league, or the championship game, I should say. I didn't win, but whatever. That's fine. Bad beat-wise, all right, so here's the thing. Last segment, we talked about Julio Jones, right? We talked about how good Julio Jones is and how he's basically... he had that game where he had 300 yards receiving. Matt Ryan had 500 yards passing. So, when you go through these things in the year, you kind of update it every week. It's like, okay, I'm going to start him. He looks like he's having a good matchup. All right, we're going to kind of, keep him in mind or whatever. You kind of play the odds and you hope everything works out in your favor. So... we go throughout the whole year, and we get to week, I want to say it was 8. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head as I'm trying to log in right now to my league. So you have the situation where the entire way throughout the total year, you have the situation where, so I knew I was playing Julio Jones, right? Because I didn't have him, but I knew I was going against Julio Jones. Not only was I going against Julio Jones, I was also going against Matt Ryan. Now... when this whole thing was happening with Julio Jones, he was having an okay year, but at the same time, he wasn't exactly being something that was kind of world beater, right? He was having a good year, but that 300-yard game kind of came out of nowhere because before that, he wasn't necessarily somebody that, was lighting the world on fire, right? He had like 16 receptions, 16 receiving yards the week before that. So he was coming off of a bad week. So I saw him like, okay, I got him, and I set my lineup. I made a little bit of what you would call a calculation error. I'm going to call it a calculation error because it makes me feel better about myself. It makes me feel like I didn't screw up terribly, terribly, terribly badly. So I don't remember if any of you guys remember how that week kind of started, right? So it was week 4 of the NFL season, right? And everything's going according to plan, more or less. Antonio Brown is doing well. Odell Beckham's doing well. Everything's going pretty well. I may or may not have messed up a little bit, and I didn't start Antonio Brown. And I'm saying this is not my fault. And I'm going to say this is not my fault. I'm going to go kind of like the league. If you've ever seen the league on FX, I'm going to kind of go in that sense and talk about how it's not my fault because I had let, a friend of mine set my lineup because I lost a bet to him. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. You can just do the stuff like that. He is, I hate him. I hate him so much because this guy, you decided, oh, okay, fine. You want to be cute about this? This is what you want to do? This is what you want to go? You want to do Antonio Brown? Fine. We're going to go like that. And I didn't start him. And I'm not saying Antonio Brown had a great week, right? Because it's not like I think he had like 64 yards receiving. But the point is, I lost by 5 points. 5. And that 64, guess what that 64 would have done? Bam! It would have raised it up. Now he had 2 touchdowns also, but that's not the point. I lost by 5. 5 points. All I had to do was start Antonio Brown. Why didn't I start Antonio Brown? Because a friend of mine, who I lost a bet to, and it's like, oh, you can set your lineup. By the way, I had a lot of good receivers. I had Gronk, I had Antonio Brown, I got Tyreek Hill later on in the year. Like, I had a good receiving core. But it was like, oh, no, that's fine. I'm going to let you do it because I need you to just do this for me really quick. And he promised that he wouldn't be a jerk about it. What did he do? He didn't start Antonio Brown, lost by 5 points. I hate it. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. It's more of me hating my friend. It's not really the league. It's more of me hating him. Anyways, sorry. It's bad thing. I don't want to talk about it. Anyways, Jeremiah, you go now.
I don't know how I can follow that.
I mean, I lost my because I didn't start Antonio. It's one thing if you don't start somebody who's like a decent, like if I didn't start James White and he had like a breakout game, okay, fine. That's not going to be a big thing because he doesn't do great every single week and all of a sudden he had a breakout game. I can live with that. I didn't start Antonio Brown. And I don't say it's my fault. I am not taking responsibility for this. Not my fault. Anyways, sorry. Go. Say your piece.
Okay. Well, week 10. Week 10. Okay, I lost 79.06 to 86.84. I play on Yahoo. You know how they have those little stupid decimal points. Okay, well, this is who I started. I started Dak Prescott.
Right.
He was playing against Pittsburgh. He actually played real good in that game. I had Derek Carr. He was on the bye week. So, okay, cool. So I went with Odell Beckham Jr. He's kind of the guy you start every week, and I went with Emmanuel Sanders versus the Saints. I thought this was going to be the game where he gets at least like 100 yards, maybe a touchdown. He didn't. He just came out flat. He only had 54 yards. Jordan Matthews, I don't even know why I even had this dude on my team. He couldn't even catch a pass.
He was still the best receiver the Eagles had at the time.
And that's sad. He's one guy I'm not drafting for 2017. So I started him for some reason. I think it's because he was playing against Atlanta. But Atlanta's defense, they weren't good against receivers, but they got better throughout the whole entire year. So this is who I left on my bench instead. On the receiver position, I left it Doug Baldwin. He played the Sunday night game against New England, and New England has a really good defense. But Doug Baldwin had 23.9 points.
Yep.
And if I was to start Doug Baldwin instead of any one of those guys, probably Jordan Matthews.
Sure.
I would have won.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. And, I think that was, we talked about because I was talking about week 4. What week was yours?
Week 10.
Week 10. So my week 4, I've been talking about all season about, my hatred for DeAndre Hopkins because, he was somebody who, like, oh, he's going to be great. No, he stinks. And I think that might have been the start of it because I started him and he didn't have a good week. I think that was like the original kind of, why are you not throwing the ball to Hopkins? Would you please just throw the ball to him? Like, I think that is pretty much what this whole thing basically stems off of, because that week he only had 4 receiving yards. So I think that was the start of just like, you're supposed to be a top-notch receiver. Why do you hate me? Why does the world hate me? Like, I think that was the start of the whole thing. And then from there, it's just been me just angry at the Texans the entire season.
Yeah, you were talking about Fedorovitz throughout the whole entire...
I mean, I can deal if you have like 50 receiving yards or like 70 receiving yards. I can deal with that. You had 4. 4 receiving yards. Not 4D, not 400. 4. Not even 4 receptions. 4 yards.
But yeah, that's something that that's something that I had to say. I just wanted to, we thought we can have this segment here because, we're getting down to the end of the, pretty much we're at the last game of the year, and we wanted to do something a little fun. It wasn't fun talking about it, but it was kind of nice to...
Nice to just get our venting out.
Just to vent. We wanted to vent to you guys.
We appreciate you letting us vent.
Yeah, I appreciate you. You smart. But
I wasn't smart. I didn't start Antonio Brown. I was dumb. I was not smart.
All right, that should be the theme for 2017. Stay smart in the DJ Khaled voice. But yeah, this is the official. Well, that's not the official last show, but it's the last show
before the Super Bowl.
Before the Super Bowl, and it is practically the final game. And we talked about the game and all that in the football show, which is we kind of need you guys to check that out, by the way, because we had a huge Super Bowl show. Like, literally, I think 40 minutes of the show we talked about it. Mm-hmm. We talked about commercials and all that.
Yep.
But yeah, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning into the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. It concludes the show. Maybe next year, Anthony. Maybe we can do the show in Minnesota on Radio Row. I don't know. Maybe
that'd be fun. I'm down.
Maybe, but but we need you guys' help to get the word out there. But I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can catch the show on a variety of platforms on YouTube, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and on the website gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on social media, variety of them. Twitter and Instagram. The handles are GSMC_F football. And on Facebook, you can like us at the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. You guys enjoy the Super Bowl.